What's up, everyone? Welcome to Lorwyn Eclipsed. And I just want to take a moment to just let you know white in Lorwyn Eclipsed is not a subtle color. This color is loud, it's tribal, and it knows exactly what it's doing. Kithkin are everywhere, board fills up fast, and most games are going to come down to some sort of combat math, tempo, and a bunch of small edges stacking up over time. And then you have the merfolk that are wanting to do something very different from the normal blue merfolk that we see. These folks are wanting to be a little bit more defensive and use all those tapping abilities, and we're going to get into those. White isn't just trying to be flashy, it's wanting to go wide, back that up with some tricks and some interaction, and slowly turn pressure into inevitability that you're going to overrun your opponent. There are definitely some cards that will shape drafts and reward you for committing early. And if you're ignoring mechanics like the transform, persist, or proliferate, you're probably misreading the color entirely. So let's break down what white is actually doing in Lorwyn Eclipsed, card by card, and talk about what really matters in limited. All right, first up, we have Kinspell Aspirant. It's a 1 white 2/1 Kithkin citizen, and it says as an additional cost to cast the spell, behold a Kithkin or pay 2. So to behold a Kithkin, choose a Kithkin you control or reveal a Kithkin card from your hand. And it says whenever another creature you control enters, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This card's going to be great if you're going for that Kithkin tribal, and if you can get it to work, I think you're going to get some great value out of this card. Having to pay the additional 2 for this is definitely not going to be an amazing feeling for this, because paying 3 to get a 2/1, it's not going to be worth it. But if you really have the Kithkins online, I think this card's going to be pretty good, and you're going to get a pretty good payoff on it. As we go through these, you're going to see there's a ton of Kithkins in this color. And then we have Gold Meadow Nomad for 1 white. It is a 1/2 Kithkin Scout with pay 1 white, exile this card from your graveyard, create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token, activate only as a sorcery. Again, having a 1-drop that can also get you some Kithkins into play from the graveyard is pretty good value. I don't think that there's anything super amazing about the card, but they do set up a really good uh, Kithkin tribal here for us. And then we have Water Brine Trapper, which is 1 white for a 2/1 Merfolk Scout. And this creature, you can pay 1, tap it, and you can tap another untapped creature you control to tap target creature an opponent controls. This doesn't sound amazing, and honestly, it's not really the best. However, a lot of your merfolks want to be tapped in order to get some sort of ability that you can actually get things done. So there is some synergies there, but I don't really, this isn't a card that I personally would want to play over some of the other ones. And then we have Everstrike's Gift. It's a 1 white mana enchantment aura. And it says enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has flying and has an additional ability of pay 1 and a white to blight 2. Return this card from your graveyard to your hand, activate only as a sorcery. Now, to blight, that's going to be putting 2 -1/-1 counters on a creature you control. So again, that's a pretty heavy cost to pay to get +1/+0 and flying. It's definitely not something I'm interested in. Now we have Burdened Stoneback. It is a 1 and a white 4/4 giant warrior. This creature enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it, and you can pay 1 and a white to remove a counter from this creature, and target creature gains indestructible until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. Damage and effects that say destroy don't destroy that creature. If its toughness is 0 or less, it still dies. If you're not aware, basically, you would have to activate this as a sorcery, but if you had a creature that you were going to swing in with and you were almost certain that it was going to die during combat, you could pay the 2 and remove a counter from Burdened Stoneback, give that creature indestructible, and it wouldn't die. However, if there are other cards in the format that have blight or put -1/-1 or -2/-2, all sorts of things like that. Like in standard, you have stab, for instance, that's -2/-2. That creature, if that -2/-2 would put it at 0 in that toughness, like it says, it would still be destroyed. It would still die. And then we have encumbered regery, whatever, for 1 and a white. It's a 5/4 merfolk soldier. This creature enters with 3 -1/-1 counters on it. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, while it has a -1/-1 counter on it, remove a -1/-1 counter from it. Like I said, this is gonna play really well with things like that Wanderbrine Trapper, right? So if you tap down that Wanderbrine Trapper and then you tap down something like the Encumbered Regery, you're going to remove one of those -1/-1 counters. However, I will say, me paying 2 to get something that is a 2/1 does not feel great when I have to do some work to get it to come up. However, it's not the worst card. It is something that's going to have to take some work. And at that point, you just have a big card that is just a big card, and most likely somebody else has played something for less value, and actually, you're just going to trade after doing all the work to get it there. All right, now we have a Kinskar Sentry for a 1 and a white. It's a rare, obviously, and it is a 2/2 Kithkin soldier, and it has first strike and lifelink. Whenever this creature attacks, you may put a creature card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, where X is the number of attacking creatures you control. This is the first card that I'm actually pretty excited for. The downside to this is a lot of the Kithkin soldiers are not huge, so I feel like this one is, if as you get that board white or that board widened, which is kind of what you're wanting to do with these Kithkins, I feel that this is a really good way to cheat something out of your hand that has a higher mana value, because realistically, by turn 3 or 4, you could have, a couple of extra creatures and have a pretty big boy on the field tapped and attacking with them. Then you have Reese the Evermore for 1 and a white. You get a 2/2 legendary creature elf warrior with flash. And when Reese enters, another target creature you control gains persist until end of turn. When it dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. And you can pay 1, tap it, remove any number of counters from target creature you control, activate only as a sorcery. Now, something I do see this being pretty good, if you can get them at the same time, is, in their end step, if you have mana open, which this is the big thing with this card that I find kind of weird, is that with the Kithkin strategy and with white, we're realistically not looking to have mana open all the time on our opponent's turn. So we're really looking to curve out, right? We're wanting to play a land, 1-drop, land, 2-drop, land, 3-drop, or some variation of that. So this is a little odd to have that mana up. So there is a little bit of you have to have something going. However, if you have that Reese down and then you have something like that Burdened Stone back that came in with those 2 additional -1 and -1 counters, the good thing is that we can pay that 1 tap after, at a later turn and remove those -1/-1 counters from it. I think that's a great way to do it, because it does say that you can remove any number of counters from target creature you control. So, there are other cards that come in with -6 -1/-1 counters, and since you can remove any number of them, you could remove all 6 of them. I think that that's going to be super great. However, I do think that there is some work around here. I think it's going to take some work. I like the card, and these 2 cards are probably some of my favorite in white so far, but definitely this one takes some work. Then we have Timid Shield Bearer. Pay 1 and a white for a 2/2 Kithkin soldier. And for this card, we can pay 4 and a white to creatures you control, get +1/+1 until end of turn. While I'm not overly impressed with this card, obviously it's a 2-drop for 2. It's a 2/2 for 2-drop. It's a pretty okay, rate. The ability to pay 5, if we make it to turn 5, which in this format, like in limited, we should. we're generally going to make it pretty fast, like a little bit further into the game. The ability to be able to pay 5 to give a +1/+1 until end of turn, it's okay. Again, there's other 2 drops that I'm a little more excited about. However, this is a good mana sink if you need a 2 drop and can put it on the board and actually pump your creatures until, even if it's until the end of the turn. I think that this could be very valuable. Then we have Wanderbrine Breacher. For 1 and a white, we get a 2/2 Merfolk Cleric. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, you gain 2 life. Again, this is playing back to before when we had the Wanderbrine Trapper that could tap down another creature. Like, say we don't want to swing in with this 2/2, it's a little bit later in the game or something, we need a way to tap it down. We can use that Wanderbrine Trapper from before and actually tap this down, gain 2 life, and because we tapped it down, we can give another creature indestructible because of the Trapper on top of the Preacher. So there is some synergies here again, on the Merfolk being a little bit defensive. And it is worth mentioning that in some of these cases, right, like with that Wonderburn Trapper, I didn't mention it earlier, and I should have, but you are able to, declare your blockers and then tap them. So that is something to keep in mind because that is not at sorcery speed. So this is something that you would be able to do here. You could block with both of them and then tap them both down to give something indestructible, but also gain that 2 life. And that's going to be something that we can recur as we go on through these. Now we have our first artifact of the white color cards. We have Bark of Doran, which is 1 and a white for an artifact equipment. An equipped creature gets +0/+1 as long as equipped creature's toughness is greater than its power. It assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power with an equipped one to attach to that target creature you control. Equip only as a sorcery, so you can't swing in, pay the 1, and then do it as an instant. It does have to be done during a main phase. However, there are some cards later on in white that really do have a bigger booty on them. They have those bigger numbers on that backside. We have some 4/7s and things and some of the giants and stuff. So it's definitely worth. It's not an overwhelmingly amazing card, but it is something that if you're needing playables, it's something that could make the deck. Then we have Keep Out. Keep Out is actually one of my favorite removal spells in the set. However, it's a little bit weak because, for Keep Out, we pay 1 and a white for an instant, and we can choose one of the Keep Out deals 4 damage to target tapped creature, or we can destroy a target enchantment. The downside here is we have to wait for them to actually, tap a creature for us to actually deal the 4 damage. So we have to wait for them to attack. We have to wait for them to actually, tap it down as a Merfolk or whatever. It is important to mention that if something has vigilance outside of a limited format or, at all, if that creature doesn't ever tap down, but that's the creature you really want to target, you're going to have to find a different way because this is not going to get the job done. Now we have Personify for 1 and a white, an instant, which is exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control and create a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. It's every creature type. So here's the thing. This seems like a really cool way to cheat in an extra body, as a combat trick or, in an end step or anything where you want to just get that extra body. Say they tapped out and you could get that extra damage. I'm honestly not a huge fan of this. I don't think that this is like super amazing. It basically is a combat trick. That's really all it is to me, is a combat trick, a way to cheat in an extra point of damage realistically because you're just getting that 1/1 changeling. Now, it is important that it does have changeling. You get a 1/1 shapeshifter. Now, it's important that it has the changeling because if you are running the Kithkins and you have something that's boosting the Kithkins, the changeling is every creature type, so it's also going to get that benefit. So that is something to keep in mind. If you need a combat trick or something like that, it could work. It definitely will work, but I think that's just a little too much that you have to ask of the card. Then we have River Guard's Reflexes for 1 and a white. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains first strike until end of turn. Untap it. Again, I think that this is a great combat trick again. I do think that this one plays as a little bit better of a removal because you get that +2/+2 and you get first strike. So if you're blocking something, trying to chump something a little bit, really, really great because you can leave your opponent unsuspecting, untap a creature, and then block it. So it's super, super important that you are able to do that. So then we have Spiral into Solitude for 1 and a white. We get an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature cannot attack or block. Pay 1 and a white to blight 1. Sacrifice this aura. Exile enchanted creature. To blight 1, you have to put a -1/-1 counter on a creature you control. So basically, for this, we have to pay 2 mana to put it on their creature. Then we have to pay 2 more mana, put a blight, like a -1/-1 counter on one of our creatures to sacrifice this aura to exile whatever enchanted creature. I think it's a little bit of a, I think that this is something very similar, in my opinion, to Path to Redemption a little bit here, that we are able to get rid of something. I think Path to Redemption's better, but I do think that this is, kind of in that same vein. Then we have Adept Water Shaper for 2 and a white, which is a 3/4 Merfolk Cleric, and other tapped creatures you control have indestructible. Again, we're wanting to be tapped when it comes to the Merfolk. I do think it's super important to note that on this card, please read this again, and do not misplay this in your pre-release or in your limited, your draft, anything like that. It does not give itself indestructible. It only gives it to your other tapped creatures. So if you have 2 of these in play, they each protect each other, not themselves. That's super important. But I do think that this card's pretty cool. I am kind of excited for this because honestly, even if you had this on there, it's like kind of a protection thing where you're just leaving it back and you're not really swinging with it, or you're finding other ways to tap it and still have, its ability without having to swing in. I think this card could be sweet. And I'm really excited to give this card a try if I get it. Then we have Ajani Outland Chaperone, our first Planeswalker of the 2 in the set. I'm a pretty big Ajani fan. I think the first time I ever played with one of his Planeswalker cards was Ajani Completed back then. So, got 1 and this card is a 1 and 2 white for a legendary Planeswalker, Ajani, obviously. For a +1, we can create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token, and a -2, Ajani deals 4 damage to target tapped creature, and to ult him to -8 him, we can look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your life total. You may put any number of non-land permanent cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Honestly, I think I'm probably not the only person that will say this, but in today's standard meta, I don't think that this card currently is going to see tons and tons of play. I could be wrong. I think, somebody might find a way to get it to work, but currently it's not as efficient as some other things that people are already wanting to do. However, in limited format in a draft, I think this card is going to be very good. It's well up below curve because, usually to get a plus to get a creature and a minus to destroy something or deal damage to a creature, we're generally going to pay more mana than 3 for this. I think that the balance out here is that it is 2 white. However, if you can get that ult off realistically, and you're sitting at 10 life or more, I think you're pretty much just going to blow the opponent up out of the water. They're going to have an answer to either Ajani very quickly, or like before you can get there, or they're going to have an answer once all that stuff, all those permanents come into play. Because you could put any number of them. You just can, like, the limit here is how many cards deep can you go, right? I th- I'm a big fan. I think it's going to be a great card. I think it's going to be a card that will win some limited games, whether it's in your pre-release event or in your draft. I think this card's going to be great. Then we have a Flock Imposter for 2 and a white for a 2/2 shapeshifter. And it has changeling. Again, that is, it has every creature type with flash and flying. When this creature enters, return up to one other target creature you control to its owner's hand. Um, you know, I think that this is going to be one of those cards again. It's going to be great if you're needing to fill out, a slot where you're running Kithkin Tribal or Merfolk Tribal and you have a way to pump them, with their command cards or anything like that, and being able to get the additional +1/+1s from things. I think that that's going to be beneficial, and I think also being able to flash this in is really great. Being able to return something that maybe has an ETB trigger is going to be awesome. However, again, with the similar things, trying to cheat this in on your opponent's end step where you can attack with this that next turn. On turn 3, you're not looking to have open like 3 open mana in white generally, because we're typically trying to be kind of aggressive here. So this isn't really what we're wanting to do. I think that's kind of counterintuitive to the actual game plan that we're having in play in like a red white or any other of these combinations. Like even in a black white, I think that this is just not really what we're looking to do. However, it's an option. I think it's an okay card. I don't think this is going to see a ton of play outside of uh, limited. Honestly, again, I could be wrong, but that's my opinion. Then we have our card that actually has a transform, which is Brigid Clachen's Heart for 2 and a white, and you get a 3/2 legendary creature, Kithkin Warrior. Whenever this creature enters or transforms into Brigid Clachen's heart wife, create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token. At the beginning of your first main phase, you may pay 1 green. If you do, you can transform Brigid. If you pay that green at the beginning of your first main phase, you will transform Brigid into Brigid's Down's Mind, and you get a creature that is also still a 3/2, but has tap, add X white or X green. I read those backwards. My apologies. Where X is the number of other creatures you control. At the beginning of your first main phase, you may pay 1 white. If you do, transform Brigid. This is going to be one of those things where it's a really great way to, if you can flip this to be able to get some ramp going, especially if you can create those Kithkin tokens and things like that. It's going to be a great way to ramp into some of these larger white and green creatures. I do think it's important to note that this Brigid does have to stay around, right? Like obviously when you play Brigid, you'll get that 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token, but you're going to have to make it stay around if you want to actually get the value out of it, if you want to have that flip side, because you're going to play it and then you have to wait until your next turn to transform it if you want. So you do have to wait. And then again, if you want to transform it back to Brigid, to get that creature token, yeah, you can pay the 1 white, it'll flip, you'll get the creature token. But then if you want to ramp, you have to wait until your next turn again. So it is important that this would have to stick around, because to get the additional, you're not going to be able to do it until that next turn. So it's important to keep in mind. Then we have Meander's Guide for 2 and a white. We get a 3/2 Merfolk Scout. Whenever this creature attacks, you may tap another untapped Merfolk you control. When you do, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Again, I think this is one of my favorite of the Merfolks so far. I don't think it's the best, but it does give us a decent sized body. We get, a 2-for-1 basically. And we've already covered quite a few Merfolk that are 3 or less mana value. And there are plenty of others. So outside of limited, there are also, Ixalan is still in the rotation. So Ixalan is still there and it has some Merfolk. You can grab one of those. I think that this card's going to be pretty decent. And I think definitely in a limited format where people are going to have limited kill spells, limited ways to handle recursion, I think that this card could be pretty strong. It's one of my favorite uncommons in the set, in white. Then we have Moonlit Lamenter for 2 and a white. We get a 2/5 Treefolk Cleric. This creature enters with a -1/-1 counter on it. So we have a 1/4, and we can pay 1 and a white to remove a counter from this creature. draw a card, activate only as a sorcery. So this is one of those cards where that Bark of Doran could be really great because this creature, without paying the 1 and a white, would be swinging as a 4/1, basically, or would be swinging as a 4, right? So it would be assigning its damage as that 4. And if we ever get to remove that counter, we still get to draw a card. I think that's pretty good value to have a 2/5 that, even without the Bark of Doran, have a 2/5 that can draw us a card. I think that's really great. I also think this is a really cool way because for Blight is really cool to target this and be able to pay that 1 and a white to have some card draw, which you don't get a ton of. I think it's a really cool ability to have, so you can get that card draw. Then we have a Reluctant Down Guard for 2 and a white. We get a 4/4 Kithkin Soldier. This creature enters with two -1/-1 counters on it. Whenever another creature you control enters while this creature has a -1/-1 counter on it, remove a -1/-1 counter from this creature. Again, Kithkin Tribal, you're not really going to have issues getting those Kithkins into play. There are plenty of tokens. There's plenty of ways to get them in. I mean, even Brigid, right? When Brigid comes in, Brigid's going to give you a Kithkin in herself, and then you're also going to get a token from her, when she enters. So I mean, realistically, if you got this down, you played Brigid, and the next turn you didn't have anything else to do, but you played Reluctant Down Guard, you, you know, or sorry, you play Reluctant Down Guard and then you play Brigid. Basically, these they're gone, right? You don't have the -1/-1s anymore, so you paid 3 for a 4/4. It's some extra work to do it, but it is a line that could be played. Then we have Tributary Vaulter for 2 and a white. We get a 1/3 Merfolk Warrior with flying. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, another target Merfolk you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. I think this is really cool because in limited, we're not going to have tons and tons of ways to deal with evasive. That's kind of normal in a limited format. So having a 1/3 flyer, while not amazing in and of itself, you can bulk up another creature with +2/+0, which could be beneficial. Could discourage blockers, could eliminate a creature that maybe they were unsuspecting. In some of the other merfolk that are a little bit lower powered, or even a big boy that you just want to trade off with something the big that they have. It's a really great way to get some value out of this here. Then we have Clachin Festival for 2 and a white. We get a Kindred Enchantment Kithkin. Whenever this enchantment enters, create two 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature tokens, and you can pay 4 and a white to create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token. To be honest, I am not a big fan of this card. I don't think that this is not what you would want to be doing on turn 3. I think this is a really cool mana sink for later on in the game, but paying 3 to get two 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature tokens is cool, especially if we have ways to pump them. It does have Kindred, which is through what Tribal was. So it does count as a Kithkin. So if something says do this when a Kithkin comes into play, it does count as a Kithkin. So that's cool. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think it's an okay card. I think it will see some play as far as limited is concerned, especially if you can get a lot of Kithkin Tribal together, or Kithkin together in general, and actually put that together. I think you'll be great. But I'm not overly impressed with the card. I don't think it's the best card or anything like that. And then we have Crib Swap for 2 and a white. We get a Kindred Instant Shapeshifter, which has Changeling. This card is every creature type. We can exile target creature. Its controller creates a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. This is a reprint, and honestly, it wasn't that great originally. And I can't think of great situations where I kind of want to exile a target creature that my opponent is controlling and give them a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter when they're probably running some sort of tribal thing where they have all merfolk or whatever, where now I'm giving them a 1/1 shapeshifter that also is a 1/1 merfolk because it has changeling, and then I'm allowing them to pump it from a 1/1. I think it loses some of its flavor there, and I think it makes it a little bit worse for sure. While I could see some uses for it. It's not super impressive. I don't think it's going to be anything crazy. I don't think like if you're drafting, I don't think this is going to be a card that you need to like heavily pick or whatever. And it might make your deck if you just need a playable card because it again, it could get rid of a 6/6 off the board if you just need it to. But I don't think that that's going to happen most of the time. Like honestly, I think we're going to be play. You're going to use this on a 3/2 or 3/3 and give them a 1/1 where they're already pumping things. And because it has that changeling, it's already being pumped. I think that's going to be the more likely thing that happens. Then we have Protective Response for 2 and a white. It's an instant with Convoke. This is the first time we've seen Convoke. So Convoke, your creatures can help cast the spell. Each creature you tap while casting the spell pays for 1 or 1 mana of that creature's color. Destroy target attacking or blocking creature. I do think this is cool because it is important to note that Convoke can be used after declaring your blockers, right? Because it's an instant, you can declare your blockers and then Convoke, use those blocked creatures that are untapped, use them, pay the 3, and then destroy some creature that you thought, like, that you jump blocked it, got it, and then Convoke it. Now, it's also important to note you don't have to block it like that if you don't want to, but it is something that you are able to do to stack it that way and make sure that you can, stop some damage from coming through and also cast a spell without having to actually pay the mana if you don't have it open. So it's a nice little combat trick. I think it's pretty decent. Um, it's pretty cool in my opinion. I don't think it's incredible, but I think it's a pretty decent removal spell. It does give some limit here, right? Because you do have to pay the 3 mana to do that. And it does have to be an attacking or blocking creature. So there are some limits to it. It's definitely not the best removal spell we've ever seen, but it can get the job done. If you just need one, it'll get the job done. Then we have Pyrrhic Strike for 2 and a white. It's an instant, and as an additional cost to cast the spell, you may blight 2. Again, you're just going to put 2 -1 counters on a creature you control. So super important. You can't put it on 2 separate creatures. It has to be on the same creature because it's on a creature you control. So choose one. If the spell's additional cost was paid, choose both instead. So if you paid just the 2 and the white, you can either destroy target enchantment or artifact, or you can destroy target creature with mana value 3 or greater. Now, if you blight 2, if you did the 2, then you can choose both of them. Super important to note that you can blight 2 on a 1/1. You can put 2 -1/-1 counters on a 1/1. So you can basically treat it as a sacrifice this creature in order to do it. You could also do it on a 2/2 and let the creature die. That is something you were able to do. You are not required to put it on a creature that is bigger than that, right? So super important there. Then we have Champion of the Klachen. For 3 and a white, we get a 4/5 Flash Kithkin Knight. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you must behold a Kithkin and exile it. So exile a Kithkin you control or a Kithkin card from your hand. Other Kithkin you control get +1/+1. When this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's hand. Again, I think this is pretty good value. You can flash this in an instep. You may not necessarily always have that mana instantly open, but it is something kind of cool that you could do. But even if you don't, even if you play this as normal and you just flash it in and you use it normally, it's a pretty decent card. I mean, you're getting basically, whatever. I think the best way that this is gonna come down right is you use a creature, you block, and before damage, you flash in Champion of Klachen, and then you target one of the creatures that was blocking something so that damage doesn't come through. You exile that card. Champion of the Klachen comes down. You have a 4/5 body on the field, and then from there, once Champion of the Klachen dies or is removed from the battlefield, then you're going to return that creature back to your hand. So I think that this is a pretty decent card. I'm a big fan of it. I don't think it's going to be the best card ever, but I think it's going to be a pretty decent card. And if you can get this and you have the Kithkin kind of going, I think this is going to be really awesome. Then we have Gallant Foul Knight For 3 and a white, we get a 3/4 Kithkin Knight. When this creature enters, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Kithkin creatures you control also gain first strike until end of turn. So, super important that it's when this creature enters, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Period. Kithkin creatures you control also gain first strike until end of turn. It's very important that even though that period is there, both of those effects are until end of turn, so it's not permanent. So I do think that that makes it a little worse. And realistically, um, if it was down, for 4 mana, would I rather have the champion or the Gallant Foul Knight? I would rather have the champion, but it is something that it's playable. It fits into the Kithkin. It can do you some work. It's there. Then we have Shore Lurker for 3 and a white. We get a 3/3 flying when this creature enters Surveil 1, which to surveil, you'll look at the top card of your library and you may put it into your graveyard or you can put it back on top of your library. Paying for a 3/3 flying feels kind of okay if you just have to have some evasion. Again, it's not the most amazing thing in the world. It definitely will do the job if you just need a 4-drop. You need something to fill the spot. It does give you some way to filter a little bit with that surveil, so you can actually get a card out of the way if you wanted. But it's not the best. It'll work. It'll play, right? But it's not going to be the best card that you would hope for in a 4-drop slot. Then we have Thought Weft Imbuer for 3 and a white. We get a 0/5 Kithkin Advisor. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of Kithkin you control. Again, for this, paying 4, getting a 0/5, decent blocker on the field. And if you attack alone, and you are running the Kithkin, and you have 7 or 8 of them on the battlefield, you've got a pretty big, maybe a 1 mana creature that has a 1 on the butt end, is swinging in as a 7/1. It's okay. You are asking for all things to kind of line up, but realistically, I don't think that that's too far-fetched. Because if you're playing Kithkin and you're getting it together, you've created some tokens, you've got plenty of Kithkin on the field. I think it is something you're going to be able to do. I don't think it's going to be, I don't think in a limited format you're going to get to like a 12 something, but I do foresee that you'll be able to get easily like a 4, 5, 6 X out of this, right? I do think it's going to be a decent card, especially as a decent blocker. I do think though that we're on the edge of this, right? Basically turn 5, turn 6, they're probably dropping something that if you ever want to block with this, you're kind of dead. So you're realistically using this to like block smaller things most of the time. Yeah, it would feel kind of bad if you're chumping something bigger just to stop the damage, and then you lose the ability for this. And realistically, if you're going wide, you're typically wanting to run some sort of like combat trick or things like that. So it's kind of not fully in jiving in my thought process with kind of what I would want to do by going wide and swinging all in, right? I'm basically going, yeah, I would normally swing wide, try and go wider than you can, stop me, and then swing all in, play some sort of combat trick, or just have enough of them wide to like, do some pretty good damage that way. This feels a little counterintuitive to me to what you typically want to do with these type of tribal kind of things where you want to go wide. Then we have Appeal to Eirdu for 3 and a white. We have an instant with Convoke again. Your creatures can help cast this spell. Each creature you tap while casting the spell pays for 1 or 1 mana of that creature's color. 1 or 2 target creatures each get +2/+1 until end of turn. Again, it's a combat trick. I'm not a super big fan of it. Again, most likely, this is a defensive card. Again, this is not really something we're trying to do. If you're doing most of your white things, you're trying to go wide. You're not most of the time trying to play very reserved. I guess if you're playing like the Merfolk want to be a little bit more defensive. You could make the argument that it would be used there, but I think with Kithkin, this isn't really what we want to do with Kithkin, honestly. I think it's kind of the opposite of what we want to do, at least for the convoke cost. And I think paying the 3 and a white for this, flat out it's just a mana sink at that point. It's not really this would be a feels bad card if you open like you pull this in your opening hand or you draw this in the first few turns. It's a feels bad card in my opinion. This would be something that'd be a little bit better if you draw it later on in the game, which kind of makes it hurt a little bit for sure. Then we have Liminal Hold for 3 and a white. We get an enchantment. Whenever this enchantment enters, exile up to one target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Until this enchantment leaves the battlefield, you gain 2 life. It's a removal. I think it's a little worse than some of the other ones we have seen. For instance, I think that um, Spiral into Solitude was a little bit better in terms of rate for what you get, and you have the ability to actually get rid of the thing and exile it fully. Um, not just on the battlefield where if they get rid of this enchantment, then they're gonna basically get it back. Uh, that feels a little bad. I think that the Spiral was just a better removal spell. Now we have Morning Tide's Light for 3 and a white. We have a sorcery and exile any number of target creatures. At the beginning of your next end step, return those cards to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control until your next turn. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. Exile Morning Tide's Light. Honestly, this card is really just a trying to make it to my next turn to draw and maybe draw my win con or a way to survive. Outside of that, I think that this card is just not going to do what people really want it to do, right? I I could be wrong, but that's my thought on the card. I think that it's definitely not going to be what everyone wants from it for sure. Another transform card. We have Eirdu, Carrier of Dawn for 3 and white. We get a 5/5 legendary creature elemental god with flying and lifelink. Creature spells you cast have convoke. So this creature is Eirdu is going to give everything convoke. So you can use your creatures to tap and pay for anything you want. At the beginning of your first main phase, you may pay 1 black. If you do, transform Eirdu. Um, and you'll get Isilu, Carrier of Twilight, for a 5/5 legendary creature elemental god with flying and lifelink again. Each other non-token creature you control has persist. When it dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. At the beginning of your first main phase, you may pay 1 white. If you do, transform Isilu. I think that this is going to be a pretty okay card. I mean, to me, this is yeah, playing this, right? Having a 5/5 flyer and lifelink in a limited format, this is a bomb. This would be a heavy reason for me to want to play black or like sneak in a black source or mana fixing to be able to get that in if I can. Definitely, definitely something I would want to do. But even if you don't have the black and you don't play the splash for it, just getting the every creature has convoke and flying and lifelink, I think that that's good value for 5 in my opinion. Um, I think that this is going to be a great card. If you draw this, I think this is a card you should be trying to play, or for sure, unless you just literally can't get your colors to work, so you just can't get other white cards in the deck to actually make this work. So if you've got this and then a bunch of just really really bad cards, I feel like that's definitely not a reason to play the card. But if you have some fixing and and you can splash for it, you definitely want to do it. You would definitely want to be trying to play this card for sure. Then we have Slumbering Walker for 3 white. We get a 4/7 giant warrior. Again, back to that Bark of Doran. If you had Bark of Doran on, you put it on this creature. It's dealing 7, right? Instead of the 4. Um, this creature enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it. And at the beginning of your end step, you may remove a counter from this creature. When you do, return target creature card with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Again, this is a great way to just have some recursion, get some things, some of those smaller bodies that you played early, traded off, trying to get those back on the battlefield. And it's super important that this is your end step. So at the beginning of every end step, you can you can do this, which is really, really cool to be able to recur some things pretty much every turn, right? You can, so basically at this point, if it's not a token, you can chump block some small little thing that's a one or two power creature, and then put it back onto the battlefield at your end step. If you just swung in just to see if you could get something through, right? Then you have Ken Binding for 3 white creatures you control get plus X, where X is the number of creatures that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token. So, first main phase, you played a couple of creatures, you played a couple of your Kithkins, whether those creatures pumped for you to attack that turn or anything like that. This is going to also give the extra pump from those, right? Because it's going to say plus X plus X. Let's say you played 2 creatures, a 3-drop and a 2-drop or whatever. So you get +2/+2. But because at the beginning of combat on your turn, you also create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token, you're adding an extra body, which means you're also adding +1/+1. I think that that's super, super valuable. And I honestly think this card is pretty decent. If you can get to turn 5 and get it on the battlefield, I think it's going to be pretty good because you're recurring some tokens. Like you're actually adding tokens to the every combat. They're not going to swing, but you are getting that +X+X, where so you're at least getting that +1/+1 every turn while you're digging through and stuff. And then you have a 1/1 to block with if you need to, or anything like that on the backswing. We have Sun Dappled Celebrant for 4 and a white. We get a 5/6 Treefolk Cleric with Convoke, and it has Vigilance. Again, I'm not excited about playing a 6-drop for 5/6. I mean, the Vigilance makes this kind of nice, but I'm not overly excited for this. Then we have Winnowing for 4 and a white sorcery with Convoke. For each player, you choose a creature that player controls. Then each player sacrifices all other creatures they control that do not share a creature type with the chosen creature they control. This is really cool if they have a, you know, creature in play that is a merfolk, but they're playing all other Kithkin. You choose the merfolk, let all the other Kithkin be done away with. And the same thing in reverse, right? They have one Kithkin and all the merfolk, then you choose the Kithkin, let all the merfolk go. It's the same thing. I think this is cool. I think it's a decent board wipe. I think the problem is going to arise um, if somebody is playing all Kithkin by chance. Well, they don't have to sacrifice anything because it shares a type. I think that that is something to keep up. Now, this doesn't necessarily just mean the Kithkin or anything like that. So, they will have to look a little bit deeper and choose like, cleric or scout or something like that, and they'll be able to get you to sacrifice things because they can choose those subtypes and things. But I do think that that is something to keep in mind. That with this, you're most likely gonna, if someone is running that kind of tribal thing, you're gonna have to select something a little bit deeper than Kithkin or anything like that. It may take a second for you to actually check their cards and actually look at them and say, oh, well, there's one scout on the board and there are no other scouts, and then you just select scout. So I think that is something you're gonna have to keep in mind. Then we have Curious Colossus for 5 and a white. We get a 7/7 giant warrior. When this creature enters, each creature target opponent controls loses all abilities, becomes a coward in addition to its other types, and has base power and toughness 1/1. Super important to note here that if you do this and a creature had -2/-2 on it, it still has that -2/-2. So once the base power and toughness goes to 1/1, that creature would be removed from the board because it would become a base power and toughness 1/1, and then it would have 2 -1/-1 counters on it, which means its you know its toughness is less than 0, or 0 or less, so it is no longer going to be on the board. But the same thing applies if you gave it base power and toughness 1/1 and it had 2 or 3 +1/+1 counters on them. It's super important to remember that it will get that. Now, the losing all abilities will mean that, if they have a Kithkin or something that says all other Kithkin get, like the champion of the perfect has all other Kithkin get +1/+1. well, it loses that ability. It'll still go to a 1/1, and they won't get the pump from the Champion of the Perfect. Super. I'm actually pretty excited for this card. I don't think that this card is going to be incredible outside of limited, just because things become a little bit more complicated. There's more ways to handle it, but I think in a limited format, this is one of my cards that it honestly in this set, if you draw this, this is a card that you pretty much are wanting to try and play, in my opinion, and it's definitely something that you should be looking to just slam it into the deck, honestly. Then we have Kithkeeper for 6 and a white. We get a 3/3 elemental with Vivid. This is the first time we've seen it, which is when this creature enters, create X 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature tokens, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. Tap 3 untapped creatures you control. This creature gets +3/+0 and gains flying until end of turn. I'm going to say that this is probably a card that I would not be playing in limited format or anywhere else, honestly. I don't think that this card is very good. Um, Mainly because realistically, in a limited format, whether it's draft or your sealed events, you're trying to play a two-color deck unless you can just really get the fixing working, and two of your colors just you can't get two colors to do it, so you have to add a third one. But either way, you're running into a situation where you're realistically only going to get two out of this. So you're going to get two 1/1 green and white tokens because you only have two colors and permanents that you control for a 3/3 body that you have to tap three creatures in order to get it. It's just too much. I don't think that this is going to be very good. So I just really don't think it's going to be that amazing. And I don't think that it's something that you should really just kind of kill yourself for, honestly. I don't think it's going to be worth it. Um, Now, as far as we've gone over all the cards. The cards that I do want to point out that for me, I think are going to be super valid and white, and that I'm super excited to play with, are that Kinscare Sentry, Reese the Evermore, um, Ajani Outland Chaperone, Brigid Clatchin's Heart, Champion of the Clatchin, and then Eirdu, Carrier of Dawn, and also the Curious Colossus. Those are definitely cards that I'm super excited about, and I think that they're really great. I think they're cards that you're gonna have to, if you can get any number of those, I think white looks really good. If you can get any of those, I think that they're definitely worth playing at that point, and you should definitely be looking to do that. So just to wrap up white again, the tribal is very very stacked here. Lots of Merfolk, lots of Kithkin. You're really wanting to go into those directions with white. And then there are a few changelings, kind of in here that you can kind of use to, if you need a creature to fill and you just need like a body and you'd really like to have a Kithkin there. I would kind of say that there is some, credibility to playing a non-Kithkin in those things, because the changelings and stuff, there's nothing about them that's just inherently overly amazing unless you can pump them, and in which case, in whatever case you get to, in my opinion, I would almost always rather have another decent card on its own as opposed to something that's relying on everything else. That's just me. It can build a single threat and protect it, or it can go wide and buff them all. White's wanting to punish those decks that can't answer some of those enchantments, and some of these bigger creatures. They're really wanting to punish them. I think that that's something that we're kind of, missing here a little bit, is some more premium removal options. At least in white, we don't have very great options. And then, giants are kind of, they're realistically, they're on that higher end here. We don't have a lot of build to them, outside of using changelings to try and have a couple of them there. And we really only have Curious Colossus, Slumbering Walker, and the Burdened Stoneback. They're slower. I don't know how viable that is. Obviously, in a limited format, things are going to be a little bit slower, but it's not going to be, 100 turns. So that is something to keep in mind. And white's power is kind of top heavy. The biggest signals in this color are the mythics, Ajani, Eirdu, and then they're huge. Like those are game-winning cards, and then Curious Colossus as well. It's game-winning cards, and at common, the whites look familiar. They look like things we've seen before. Creatures, tricks, structure, kind of trying to build out, go wide, or be defensive and be together and kind of be a unified group. So it's definitely something we've seen before. It's not the best collection of cards. It's definitely wanting to be tribal, wanting to have some enchantments potentially to play to help remove some things. Um, and it's wanting to either split between going wide or going tall. And so those don't always jive together. So you kind of have to choose one of those, in my opinion. I do think that the Curious Colossus, it does help with your go wide. If you can drop that Curious Colossus, get everything to a 1/1, maybe drop some things because they were blight or anything like that. I think that going wide, this can help. So that tall does kind of mesh with that go wide strategy. Because realistically, none of these big guys, none of these giants that are, the bigger boys in here that have, these 7/7 or 4/7, they don't really have great ways to, they don't have trample. So you're basically gonna get chump blocked if they can. Now, it's good because obviously they're gonna get rid of some things or they're gonna die, but that is something to keep in mind. And honestly, right now with white, if you don't draft with a plan, you're going to be punished for it. So go in with a plan, know these cards, have some idea of what you're trying to do with white, and that's white for Lorwyn Eclipsed. See you in the next one.